Dana White's Contender Series. This is Season 6, Episode 2. We have a 5-fight card ready to break down. I'm John Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the welterweight division, we have a matchup between Billy Gaff, who's a minus 240 favorite. Now the comeback on Shimon Smitrowski is plus 200. And I have to agree with the early line movement. Billy Gaff opened as a small favorite at minus 145. He's now bet to minus 240. I think that's probably closer to accurate. This guy is, a well-rounded fighter. He seems to have a good gas tank. He comes from a high school wrestling background, and we've seen him go to that in a lot of his fights. He's the former Cage Titans champion in the welterweight division. He's the double champ over in CES. He took his last fight on just 7 days' notice, fighting up a weight class against Justin Sumter, and ended up going through some early adversity in that first round, but he powered through it as he typically does, and he got the stoppage in the second round. And that's really the story of his career, is like the dude, he has talent, yes, but it's also like he's just willing to fight for your money more. Some would say he's got that dog in him. And I like guys like that because I know that I can count on them. They're not going to look for a way out. And I think he has a solid enough skill set as well. I mentioned the wrestling background. I think he'd be the one more likely to land takedowns in this matchup. He's going against Szymon Smotricki here. And Smotricki actually fought on last season of Dana White Contender Series. He faced Mike Millett and was submitted in the first round. And basically, the reason why I picked Millett in that fight and the reason why I'm not super high on Smotricki is because he just always puts himself in bad grappling spots. He is a decent technical submission grappler. I believe he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But you look at all of his fights, first of all, the level of competition wasn't great, and I know he's had some good training camps. He's formerly SBG Ireland guy. He's trained all over the place, really. He's fought in Bellator. He's originally coming from a Russian family, but he fights out of Israel, so he's gotten rounds in with Natan Levy, who previously fought on Contender Series last season as well. So he's definitely got the training rounds, and for this fight, he's actually been in Vegas for a few weeks. I saw him on Instagram at Extreme Couture, getting rounds in at Syndicate MMA. So all of those things are good, and it looks like his striking is finally starting to develop. But I keep going back to him putting himself in bad positions on the mat. Yes, that bit him against Mike Millett, but over the course of his career, that's been a constant issue. Even in his last fight, after the Millett fight, his most recent fight, he got a second round stoppage. And even in that fight, he found himself deep in a choke. This guy constantly puts himself in bad spots. And it's not that I think Billy Gaff is this great submission grappler, but I do think he has a decent ground game, enough to be able to make Smotricki pay and take advantage of that position. And one thing I'll say about Gaff is that his ground and pound is probably his best weapon. He drops some vicious elbows when he gets in favorable positions on the mat. I expect him to do that here if Smotricki makes a mistake on the mat. So give me Billy Gaff. I just think he's willing to fight for it more. He's a little bit sharper on the feet, a little bit more technical. Smotricki, he's long, he's got some good body kicks, but he's definitely there to be countered as well. And I think he's going to make a mistake, and I think Billy Gaff will make him pay and start raining that ground and pound and get a finish in the second or third round. So Billy Gaff by TKO is the official pick, and he's going to be the pick for the D-Gen parlay as well. And up next in the heavyweight division, we have a matchup between Waldo Cortez Acosta as a minus 340 favorite, the biggest favorite on the card. The comeback on Danilo Suzart is plus 280. And this is your typical heavyweight Contender Series matchup where both guys have obvious knockout power. But Acosta, I think, is a little bit more skilled. He's a 6-0 undefeated prospect. He's actually the former LFA heavyweight champion. And in that fight, what impressed me was the fact that he probably dropped those first two rounds. He fought Thomas Peterson, a guy who's never been outside of the first round. Peterson took him down multiple times. He landed some good stuff on the feet as well. And it wasn't until later on in the fight where Acosta still had the cardio to carry that power through the third round, and he ended up clipping him on the feet, got the finish. He comes from a boxing background, so he does have some pretty nice hands. And again, I just keep going back to this guy has pretty good cardio for the heavyweight division. Typically, we know the big guys, they're going to swing with power, but they can't really do it for a full 3 rounds. He actually can, so that's probably his best attribute, and that alone, I think, can get the job done at this level, especially against a guy like Suzart here, who's 9-1 professionally, 6 wins coming by knockout. But, I mean, the level of competition is just really not there. He's not technical on the feet whatsoever. He basically just, he whips this overhand right, with speed and power. There's no doubt about it. He does have power, even though he doesn't look super athletic. but he throws that thing with speed, and if he connects, it's going to hurt you. But outside of him being able to land that type of a punch here against Cortez Acosta, I don't see how he wins this fight, really. I think Acosta has much better cardio. I think he's much more skilled in terms of the boxing, a lot more sharp defensively as well. So give me the big favorite here in Waldo Cortez Acosta. I think he's probably the rightful favorite. I'm not looking to bet him at this price because at the end of the day, it is a high variance heavyweight matchup. But in terms of the DGen parlay, we're going to go with the favorite in the 6-0 prospect. Which brings us to our featherweight matchup. We have Connor Matthews coming in ever so slightly as the favorite at -115, and we have Francis Marshall on the comeback at -105. And this one's kind of an interesting dynamic because it's hard to know what to expect from Connor Matthews. He trains out of Joe Lozon's gym in Massachusetts. He's 5-0. He's 30 years old, so it's not like he's this young prospect by any means, but he's 5-0, and only one of those fights have gotten outside of the first minute. He has all 5 wins are by first round stoppage, and 4 of those 5 he finished inside of a minute. The only one that lasted longer than that lasted like 2.5 minutes before he got the stoppage. And what's funny is, so the other thing I'll say is his level of competition is absurd. I mean, the combined record of the guys that he's fought when he fought them was 19 wins and 115 losses. And a big part of that is because he fought one dude that was 1-8, one dude that was 0-7. But the fight that actually lasted the longest in his career was against this dude. He's like a 38-year-old dude that honestly I think gets paid to like be brought into these regional fights and not necessarily throw those fights, but lose in an exciting fashion. And honestly, that's what I think happened. Like, he clipped him, he got him out of there early, but the guy who he fought had 97 career losses, a ton by knockout, a ton by submission, basically all of them inside the first round. So it's like, when this guy is fighting people like that, we don't know what he's going to look like against any form of a step up. Not that Francis Marshall is this massive step up. I'm not saying that he's like this stud or anything, but I do think it's more quality opponents than what Connor Matthews has faced. And because we have so many questions on what he will look like outside of the first round, I don't feel good about seeing him as a favorite, even if it is just a slight favorite, because Francis Marshall, there is a couple things we can look at here, because he's just 23 years old. He turned pro just 3 years ago, so he's a little bit inexperienced, but he does seem to be pretty well-rounded. His striking's not terrible. I actually expect him to be the better striker over 15 minutes. Matthews for sure has the power advantage, but if he doesn't clip him early, I think he really starts to fade. He's a guy that historically he's a Terrence McKinney type. Like, they're going to come at you, they're going to give everything they have to get you out of there, but outside of that, they're going to slow down. And a guy like Francis Marshall, I think, can take advantage of that. He's 5-0 as well. 4 of his 5 wins have come by rear naked choke. He's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he is pretty good at taking your back and choking you out. And if Matthews is going to roll around with him and get tired, I think that probably happens here. So give me the young kid. I'm actually considering making an individual bet on him as well. But we're going to go with Francis Marshall. It's basically a pick'em, but he's going to be our one slight underdog this week. Which brings us to our next fight. We have Shannon Ross, a -240 favorite, and Vinicius Salvador on the comeback at +200. This one's in the flyweight division. Shannon Ross was actually originally supposed to fight Charles Johnson, who obviously took the fight against Muhammad Makayev in the UFC a couple weeks ago. So they brought in Vinicius Salvador. He was supposed to face Victor Altamirano on last season of Contender Series. It didn't end up happening. Carlos Candelario took his spot, so now they bring him back in to fight Shannon Ross. So that's kind of how this all worked out. I bring that up because, you know, Contender Series a lot of times is trying to build up one side. Like, that's clearly not happening here, because Shannon Ross was probably brought to this fight to build up Charles Johnson, who now had to take the UFC fight and isn't fighting here. So it's not like they're building up this 33-year-old fighting out of Eternal MMA in Shannon Ross. He is an okay fighter, though. I do think he's probably the rightful favorite. I don't know if he deserves to be this big of a favorite, but he does have some solid striking, powerful leg kicks, seems to have a good jab, some decent feints as well, and he just seems to be pretty well-rounded. You know, there's not really a ton of glaring holes in his game. He did get dropped and kind of club and subbed just a couple fights ago, which wasn't a great look. And now he is coming off nearly a 2-year layoff. So it's been a while since we've seen him. Obviously, we don't like the long layoff, especially at 33 years old. But against this guy, Misha Salvador, this dude's basically just like a knockout or bust type of fighter, like your typical Contender Series guy that has to win by a finish. I think that's him. He's got 13 wins. All 13 have come inside the distance. He's got 4 losses. He's been finished in 3 of those 4. So what's that? 17 fights, and just 2 of those have reached the 3rd round. 1 went to decision. 1 was a 3rd round finish for him, but the one that went to decision, he ended up losing. So it's not like this guy has the cardio to keep that pace up for 15 minutes. I've even seen a couple of his fights on the regional scene where it seemed like he was starting to get tired. Even in round 1, he started to slow down. You know, he puts his hands down. He's a bit of a showman, and I'd expect a little bit of that here against Shannon Ross. I think this is going to be a pretty good fight. I'd favor Salvador in terms of the power department, but if he's unable to find the chin of Shannon Ross, I think Ross just has many more ways to win. I think Ross is fine in the striking, as long as he doesn't get clipped. And I think if Ross takes this guy down, he could grind on him, he could wear on him, and really lay and pray to a decision. I don't think he'll try to do that because, as we saw last week, Dana White is clearly looking for finishes this season, which we love to see. And I think that can happen if Salvador starts to fade. I think Ross could potentially get a stoppage in the 2nd or 3rd round. So Ross by TKO is the official pick, and he's going to be the play for the DGen parlay as well. Which brings us to our main event in the lightweight division. We have Chris Campbell coming in as a -140 favorite. The comeback on Chris Duncan is +120. And you guys probably recognize the name Chris Duncan because he fought on last season of Dana White Contender Series. Obviously, we had the baby narrative. He was a new father around that period. So in my breakdown, you know, I mentioned the baby narrative. Obviously, his first fight ended up getting scrapped. I think it was the weight cut. The guy got sick. Anyway, they rebooked him against Slava Claus. They rebooked him against Slava Claus, and honestly, a much harder matchup for him. He looked, you know, to pressure early, move forward, and look for his power shots. He just wasn't able to find his range against a better kickboxer in Slava Claus, who was basically able to just stay on the outside and really just pick him apart. His jab couldn't miss. He landed some powerful hook shots as well. He really beat up Chris Duncan in that fight, and then obviously knocked him out clean in the 2nd round. And looking at this matchup, I actually think Chris Campbell has a similar skill set to a lesser degree of Slava Claus, in that that's a lot of what he does in his fights. He's more than willing to stay on the outside, use his good footwork. He's got a strong jab as well. The diversity of strikes that he uses, he mixes it up well to the body, and then going back up top, he's got some decent leg kicks as well, some trips in the clinch. He's just a well-rounded guy. He's previously fought in Bellator, Cage Fury, so this guy's level of competition is definitely more than a lot of the rest of the guys on this card, but I just think he's a pretty solid striker. I think his ground game could get exposed, but I don't think it's going to be getting exposed by Chris Duncan, who can maybe land a takedown or 2, but I'd be surprised if that's the game plan. I could just see this one being similar in that Duncan's going to move forward and pressure as he always does, but if he's unable to land a big kill shot, I honestly think Chris Campbell is going to piece him apart with that jab, mix it up to the body. It's the diversity of strikes that allows him to land clean on a lot of his opponents, and I think that happens here. So Campbell by knockout is going to round things off for us in the main event, and he's going to be the final pick of the DGen parlay as well. So to recap, the DGen parlay is going to be Billy Gaff in our first fight at -240. The second fight's going to be the heavyweight 6-0 prospect Waldo Cortez-Acosta in that heavyweight bout. I just think he's much better boxer, much better cardio, basically just needs to not get clipped early by this other guy. In the third fight, I'm going with the youngster, the 23-year-old Francis Marshall. Ever slight underdog at -105. He's going to be the pick in this one. I just think Connor Matthews has a lot to prove, and I don't know if he's going to be able to do that in this spot, so we'll see. And then the next fight, we're going to go with Stephen Ross, who I think is the rightful favorite, but I also don't really feel great about this price tag, but he's going to be the pick. I just think he's a more well-rounded fighter that should be able to take over as the fight goes on. And then, of course, in the main event, I just said we're going to go with Chris Campbell, who I think is going to be able to stay on the outside and piece up Chris Duncan with that jab repeatedly before eventually finding a finish himself. So that's it, guys. 5 fights this weekend. 4 favorites, 1 very slight underdog, basically a pick 'em. But either way, those are my plays this week. As always, I'm going to tweet out the graphic on my Twitter at JohnKellyDFS in case you guys want to tail it or fade me or make fun of me when it loses. But either way, best of luck. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.